In Goleta, California with Captain Howard Orr.
So I'm a fire captain with San Bernardino County.
Peter and myself were setting out on kind of a mission to bring awareness about first responders and trauma, PTSD, the silent killer. Let's go back 48 hours before you went to Ground Zero.
So when 9/11 hit, just like everybody else, I saw it unfold on TV. This is a piece of history that I'm going to go to. You know, arriving there, I'm like, my kids will read about this in their history books. This looks like a Hollywood set, but Hollywood couldn't quite do this good.
How did you mentally prepare yourself for what you knew was not only going to be historic, but was potentially going to be the most difficult call you've ever been on?
What really, I think the moment struck me is we drove on tour buses. This was a week into the incident, and there were still people lining in the streets, waving and cheering for these buses because they knew we were going there to try and find their loved ones. Then you would drive by the walls of all the photos the families had posted of their missing family member. And that's the reality. This is why we're here. Got my partner, who I eventually, Duke, was the search dog that I took to 9/11. Every day you're doing some kind of training with these dogs. They are your partner. You see them more than you see your family. And our dogs are trained for live scent. They bark when they find someone alive.
Were you still yourself hopeful?
The mental health professional that said, what do you do to get your mind off the job? You have to have something that takes your mind from the job. And this is what really stuck with me. She says,
you do a great job of training to go, but really it's kind of up to the station captain or to an informal leader to look out for the folks after that. And thankfully that's changing.
I had an incident where I responded to a brush fire. It was a down power line, and I'm not prepared. There was another power line down. I fall back and land on the wire, and I took a jolt. What they later calculated was 7,400 volts of electricity. I guess this is how I'm going to die. Your immediate thought goes, for me, it was my family. That became the motivation for me to fight. You know, John, he's trying to help you. He's making multiple attempts. Had he given up at any time, I wouldn't be here. I said 4 words to John on his second attempt, but I told him, don't let me die. And he just kept trying. But all those people that came to visit was an opportunity to tell the story one more time, because I think that in itself is a healing process.
In Goleta, California with Captain Howard Orr.
Good morning.
Howard, thank you very much for agreeing to do this.
Glad to be here.
And good to see you again.
Yeah, much appreciated. Kind of wanted to we want to get to know you a little bit and kind of start where, what do you do here? What is your role here at this fire station?
Okay, so I'm a fire captain with San Bernardino County. I'm assigned to the truck here at Station 11. We have 2 pieces of apparatus that roll out of here. Front line, an engine that's a paramedic engine, and then we have the truck also. We run our urban search and rescue program here, our water rescue program. So it's a fairly busy house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious, how does one decide to get into being a firefighter and fire and rescue and all the other things that's on your resume?
Yeah, so my backstory is I'm a twin. My twin brother is in law enforcement. He's with the Ventura County Sheriff's Department. And back when he was going through his training, he asked me, hey, do you want to take an EMT class? Mm-hmm. And I said, sure, what is it? And he goes, well, it's what the ambulance guys do. I'm like, that sounds cool, let's do that. And that's kind of launched my career. I finished the class and was immediately working on an ambulance down in Ventura County. Did that for about a year and then went to paramedic school in LA. And once I completed paramedic school, I was working at EMT in Ventura, paramedic school, and then came up here to Santa Barbara County and worked as a medic as a private ambulance for about a year and a half, or actually almost 4 years, and then had the opportunity to test for the fire department. So I'd put myself through the fire academy, and just everything kind of lined up. The opportunity was there when I was ready. So I've been with the county fire department since '94. So total in emergency services, been with emergency services about 35 years now. Wow. County fire coming up 30 years early next year.
Yeah, it's a good amount of time to serve the communities around here. And what would you say appealed to you most about this job?
I think every day is different, that no 2 days are going to be alike. There's no 2 vehicle accidents are the same, no 2 medical emergencies are the same. So I like the outdoor environment. I like the flexibility of everything and the challenges. There's so many disciplines. I tell guys when they come to the academy, it's like, pick your poison, your poison will be picked for you. Whatever specialty, whatever discipline that you're passionate about, the fire service has that opportunity to get involved. So I've been involved with urban search and rescue and technical rescue, I've been a paramedic for 34 years now. I was a tactical medic with our sheriff's SWAT team for 13 years. I created 2 canine programs, one for disaster search dog and the other one for arson. Been collateral for investigations. So just kind of touched a lot of different areas, and as things catch my interest and get involved, and I tend to dive deep into whatever I'm involved with. So it's been a great ride.
Well, that's wonderful. And just Peter and myself we're just setting out on kind of a mission to bring awareness about first responders and trauma, PTSD, which some refer to as the silent killer, and how it can creep over time, like we were talking about, the cumulative trauma and even grief, but also huge incidences that they can cause trauma for the rest of your career or even life. And I can't think of when I think of first responders, search and rescue, my mind always goes first to the images of Ground Zero and the Pentagon on 9/11. And I know that you were there. So let's go back about 24 to 48 hours before you went to Ground Zero,
Sure.
Before you went to New York.
Yeah.
How did you know? When did you find out you were gonna head that way, and how did you prepare yourself? What'd you tell your family and friends that you're doing?
Sure. So taking it back a little bit further, 97 is when I created this canine program, and again, go back to my twin brother who had a police canine, saw what a service dog really was about, and thought, well, this is a resource that we just don't have here. We were building up our urban search and rescue program and introduced that program. So from 97 till 2001, I'd worked with a canine initially. It didn't quite work out. Got my partner, who I eventually, Duke, was the search dog that I took to 9/11. Okay. He and I were partnered in 2000, and just every day you're doing some kind of training with these dogs. They are your partner. You see them more than you see your family. Mm-hmm. And it was a tough decision. So when 9/11 hit, just like everybody else, I saw it unfold on TV. I was actually in Washington State at Tacoma, Washington, at a military base, going through my FEMA training. Okay. Once we were certified as a canine and handler together, we then go through another handler program, and that's where we were watching things unfold with 30 of the country's 50 search dogs at the time. We're all together in this military base. So we see it unfold, we realize that this is what we are training for, and everybody wants to be there at that time. So because all flights have been shut down, where there's no way to get there immediately, the team we were normally assigned to out of Los Angeles City did deploy, but they took other search dogs to complete their roster. So as we completed the class a couple days later, keeping tabs on what was going on, we literally drove back from Washington to California, called State OES and said, we're available. And we, within hours, were assigned to San Diego's Task Force 8, which was one of the next round of teams going. So we deployed, flew out to 9/11, or New York, on a C-130. I remember sitting on the plane thinking, this is a piece of history that I'm going to go to. The decision was very tough because it's what we trained for day in, day out for years. Yeah. My son had only been born 2 weeks earlier. Oh, wow. My daughter was 2, about to turn 3. So it was a very tough decision to go away from home, knowing you're going to be deployed for a couple weeks, and to still, but my wife was very understanding. She knew this is what I was training for. This is what I put in all this time for. So super supportive of that. And then, arriving there, I'm like, my kids will read about this in their history books, not realizing that I would read about it in my history books in college as well. So
yeah. So how did you get into the canine? So what was?
Yeah, I made the proposal to our department in 97. Again, that exposure to my brother and his service dog, and realizing, well, there's jobs that these dogs can have. And what do you do in the fire service? Well, there really was only 2 areas. One was an arson dog, accelerant detection, and the other was search dogs. And we just didn't have anything in the department. We were building this resource of urban search and rescue up. How great a niche would this be to have this resource available to us? So I knew it was a commitment. Met with another handler who was early in the stages of the Search Dog Foundation, where my dog was trained, and they were able to provide us with a dog that was trained to do the job. And we got together. I learned my part on the human side. The dog already knew his job. It's harder to train the human than it is the dogs. And we were partnered together, and we were certified just shortly before 9/11.
And you were saying that there was only 50?
At the time, there was only 50 certified canine teams in the country.
Search canines.
Search canines for disaster search canines. So FEMA does the certification process.
Yeah.
One per state.
Yeah,
really,
roughly.
essentially.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. California, we have a few more just because it's, we're an earthquake country.
Yeah.
We have, of the 28 federal teams, 8 of them are in California. And every team has to have 4 canines. So we kind of would respond with different teams, whoever had a need. So in this case, 9/11, LA being the first to go, we weren't in place. So they took teams from Orange County, from Riverside, and from San Diego. So then the second round of teams were going to go. They had to be backfilled for their missing teams. And so we got assigned to San Diego.
So that incident sort of took priority in some ways. Just going back to when you got off the plane, what was it like? What were you seeing? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, so when we arrived, it was on the 17th of September. And the first round of teams had already been in country working alongside New York Fire and New York Police. And they actually ultimately ran the incident from start to finish. So we were an asset and a resource to assist them in the operation. We were assigned to the night shift. Our team is of 62 people at the time. We're broken into 2 teams. One works the daytime, one works night. So we were part of the night operations. And we had a 1-day delay getting started because there was some equipment that we were waiting for. So we actually got working on the night of the 19th. Wow. And we worked until they transitioned from rescue to recovery. We got some intel from the first teams that were there, had an appreciation for the likelihood that whether or not we were going to find people alive anymore, but we were still in a rescue operation. And at the time we thought there was over 6,000 people missing. They were still trying to account for who was or who was not in these buildings. And we now know there were closer to 3,000.
Going back to the plane flight, when we respond to calls, we have the time of dispatch to the time that we arrive on scene to mentally prepare ourselves for what we're potentially going to see. And I feel like that plane flight would have been that period of time for you to kind of leave home behind. Always remembering it. It's not like you just forget it, but starting to transition your brain to get into job mode. How did you do that? Like, how did you mentally prepare yourself for what you knew was not only going to be historic, but was potentially going to be the most difficult call you've ever been on?
Sure. We only knew what we were seeing on TV like everyone else as far as the size, and I think that's when we first arrived at Ground Zero and saw the magnitude of it and how large it was. I think my first impression was, this looks like a Hollywood set, but Hollywood couldn't quite do this good. Like, this was more than you would have accepted, overwhelming. Being the night shift, you see a certain image, and then as the sun would come up in the morning towards the end of our shift, you started to really appreciate this was a 16-acre site. 210-story buildings that were each an acre in size and per floor. That's 220 acres of building. Among the other buildings that had collapsed are now 6 stories tall and 16 acres. So the largest piece of concrete we found was about the size of my fist. It was all bent, twisted steel. Things that you wouldn't ever think would survive. I mean, a newspaper, a chafing dish, business cards. One of the handlers we were with worked for Morgan Stanley. They occupied one of the top floors. And he actually was able to, these are, co-workers that he was, familiar with. So seeing that, the magnitude of it, it's going to be overwhelming, because you're seeing this is just, you're trying to process, you have a job at hand, and that is, at that point, if we can't find people alive, to at least find who we can and bring some closure to those families, because there's so many. What really, I think the moment struck me is the first night that we drove. At the time, they had set up the base camp at Jacob Javits Center, about 16 blocks from Ground Zero. And as we drove on tour buses, people knew that the buses were transporting the rescue team. So they were literally, this is a week into the incident, and there were still people lining the streets, waving and cheering for these buses, because they knew we were going there to try and find their loved ones. And then you would drive by the walls of all the photos that the families had posted of their missing family members. And that's the reality. That was the gut check to go, this is why we're here. These are the people we are here to try to find for them. And our dogs were trained for live scent. They bark when they find someone alive. They had never worked those kind of shifts without getting a reward, which was a toy for finding someone alive. In training, they always got a toy reward. We knew we were gonna have to work long periods of time without them getting that reward, but still had to keep them motivated. We would only be able to do that back at base camp. You could not find a place anywhere in that pile that you can go train your dog and get them a reward, have a co-rescue worker hide for them and kind of recharge the battery. You couldn't do that to the New York firefighters and police officers and everyone else working there because they knew what a barking dog meant. And that kind of hope, you can't give that to them in that environment. So you had to wait until the end of the shift when you go back to base camp and you're cleaning up, and then you would hide somebody and make sure that they're still on point. They're still alerting as soon as they find somebody. So we had trained our dogs to alert to what we call human remains, because in every disaster we are going to deal with it. And we knew what that looked like because we had trained in that environment. So we would use the dogs to a certain extent for that purpose, but we didn't want to confuse them and start changing the rules that they're supposed to be looking for people that are alive. And now we're focused on cadaver scents. So we had several requests to search areas and pockets. They would open up a void and ask to come in and bring the dog in, and you would have to ask the guys from New York Fire, can you step back a little bit because your scent is influencing this space? And they move back a couple of feet, and I go, no guys, I need you to move back a little further. And they would move. They were very accommodating to the process, and we would work the dog, and they would show body language indicators that say, I've seen this before in training. I know what this means. I can tell you there's human scent there, but I can tell you that it's not indicating to me that they're alive. And we found out the next day they pulled 3 firefighters from that spot.
So I had the opportunity to go to hear you give an account of your experience there. You came to our USAR class. I was my RS2 class, or RS1 class rather, down in Oxnard. And you came and gave a PowerPoint at that. And a couple of different things. If I remember correctly, you stated that they didn't find a survivor after 14 hours.
Yeah, it was after about 12 hours. The last crew that was in the stairwell with the one civilian they were trying to bring out, they never left her. And they were rescued after about 12 hours after the collapse.
And as compared to an earthquake or a tornado where it could be weeks, they're still finding, compared to what you encountered there. And that really, I've never forgotten that. I remember you talking about that, as well as crews coming up to you and asking you to help them. And I don't know if that's something you want to talk about.
Sure.
Or
Sure. I remember there was one night we actually did multiple searches. I think there was about 8 searches we were asked to do back to back, and there was a point where I just said, guys, I'm getting impressions from my canine partner Duke that he's looking at me very confused, like, you keep pushing me towards these odors of these are cadaver odors, like, are we changing the rule? What do you want? Because you can force them into a bark alert, and that's not what you want. But there was one on that same night, we were working on a bank. It was in Tower 4, and we worked through an area. He dove off from my path. He's essentially was following, and he goes in and he kind of shoves his head. It was a big, deep-chested, 80-pound chocolate lab, and put his head into this void space and just froze. And it was on a moment of like, we've seen this before. It was like deja vu. A year earlier in a building collapse in Echo Park in Los Angeles, he did the exact same thing, and we knew there was a person had passed in the collapse, and we could even see part of it. So we knew the body language and their behavior, so we would use that to our advantage. And he did the exact same thing. Here we are in New York a year later doing the exact same thing. I'm like, he's got something here. And we worked the rest of that building, and there were images I have that where I was standing, I would turn around and look, and there was an office completely intact. Literally someone's cup of coffee half full, family pictures in the back, and everything monochromatic from all the concrete dust settling. But then I do a 180-degree turn, and I'm watching Duke out on a cantilevered part of the floor out of the building. This is why we use the dogs, is because of their agility and their ability to use a smell. Where people are unconscious and unresponsive, they will smell them if they're still alive, and they will bark. That's why we're bringing them to the incident. But he can go out on this cantilevered hanging part of this floor, where my walk across is going to further collapse the building, where he can go out there and he's searching. It's like, and he's just in his environment. This is, I hate to say it, but it's a playground to the dogs, and it's just a different playground. Yeah. So he's using his nose and using, it's amazing ability. We work back to the building. He comes to the same spot. He does the same thing. I said, let's call in a rescue team. And we found out the next day they pulled a civilian out of that location. That same night, we had another couple guys from New York come up and bring me a metal plate, this triangular plate, not much bigger than, maybe 8 by 8. And they said, hey, there's a drop of blood on this. Can your dog tell us, was there somebody there? And I said, well, do me a favor, don't tell me where you got the plate. I said, let my canine partner tell me where you got that plate. Just give me a general area. We brought him in, he searched, and he's moving around. All of a sudden, his nose goes right to the ground, and that's where the plate came from. They go, yeah. Wow. So the challenge is sometimes on the search side, we search, we make alerts, we make indicators, we pass that information on, and we move on to the next search. So in some cases, we didn't know what the result was from that search, but we know of the 3 firefighters and the 1 civilian. So at least we know there's some families that have closure from that work, and we would do that every night. It was amazing to watch them work in that environment, because everything's just bent, twisted steel. They're climbing ladders to get into access place. They're walking along rebar as their support, but yet they're still working.
So, I hadn't actually thought about this before, but were you still yourself hopeful?
Yeah, I think that's the mindset at that point, is that until we can say otherwise, is there any hope, any chance that someone's still surviving here? That's our job to find out. And we're going to give them every chance we can until we're told otherwise. I think the other images that really has stuck with me, and we're looking at 22 years now, a still fresh image. In that Tower 4, there was a bank. And as I say, the images where you were at the moment the building collapsed determined whether you survived or not. I mean, again, whoever was in that office easily got out. There was a stairwell that exited. On that same floor, there was a child care center. And walking through there, I remember this moment of seeing a coat rack. On the top of the coat rack was a police helmet. It was a little child's plastic police helmet. And on the ground upside down was a plastic fireman's helmet. And that to me kind of summarized this whole incident. Like, how ironic was it? There was probably 2 children at this child care center playing firemen and policemen when all this went down. And just the correlation to how many firefighters and policemen we lost. That image is already always kind of solidified the representation of what that whole incident was about. Wow. To me. And so we searched 7 nights on the pile until it was transitioned to recovery. And then we were in New York for 2 more days before we came home.
So if I remember right too, there was the canine handlers and the canines themselves were segregated, right? Like, were you guys in your own camp?
The canines were separated because they were in crates. And then the crews, we all at base camp where we would relax, and when we were off shift, where we'd sleep was in just one big open area of the Jacob Javits Center. And then we would go to the forward base right at ground zero. There were crates there, but the canines never spent any time in there. We would kind of stage at the entrance to the plaza between towers 4 and 5, which was still partially stood, and it would be the entrance to ground zero. And you would wait for an assignment. And we knew when you got an assignment, you had to get into the pile right away, or they would give it to someone else to do the work. And that, every night we would pass 3 firefighters from New York Fire, the same 3 guys I would see in the same spot every night. And they would just work until they were exhausted. They'd come off the pile, they'd sit down and take a short break. I remember one of the chiefs from New York asking them, how long have you been here, son? And they had no idea. They had lost track of time and what day it was, because they would just work until they were exhausted, come off the pile, get a little rest, and go right back to work. And I would come by with Duke, and they would ask if they could pet him. And normally the answer is no, the dogs are working, we have to leave them focused, we don't get them distracted and hurt. But that's that moment where you go, these guys are going to benefit more from a couple of minutes with the dog than it is for me to get into that pile sooner. So we would take that moment and let them talk about their dogs at home, get their mind off the task at hand for even just a moment, and realize there's a greater benefit from the mental health side of it for these guys to have a couple minutes with this dog than it is for me to get out to that pile faster. So we would run into these guys every night in the same spot and have the same conversation. But we realized, there's a greater benefit here that needs to happen. And so we would let them pet him and take whatever time they needed, and then we would go to do our work. It didn't bother Duke, and I thought they are going to gain more from letting them do that.
Wondering how do you take yourself out of, I mean, I would imagine you have a job to do, you have Duke with you, you're sort of in an objective mindset, but also stopping to see the pictures. I mean, you realize, oh, this was someone's office, this was the child care center, and kind of bringing you out of that. How do you stay in that kind of mindset and sort of compartmentalize this so you could get your to your objectives?
I think when you're in the work, when you're in that moment, you're focused on the job at hand. Mm-hmm. It's later when you start to download and process some of this that you realize the magnitude of what that was. There were times where, for a fraction of a second, you see that office, and the question comes in, like, how does this survive? How does that coffee cup still stand upright and still have full among all of this destruction around us? Wow. So you really don't process that information. So I think you download that information later and process that. We had done a debriefing when we came back to San Diego, and it didn't happen for a couple of weeks. There wasn't any immediate diffusing because the group was so large. When we got back, of course, you're re-engaging with your families. And those are hard times because it's hard to explain to them what you're going through if they don't have any kind of personal connection or experience. They're seeing what's on TV like everyone else.
Sure. Yeah.
You're trying to explain to them what your real experiences are, but you're trying to do it in a way that you realize they're not going to ever really truly understand if they weren't there with you. And there's always that connection you have with those that you went with, just like in the fire service. We're one big family. I call it a bunch of brothers and sisters and a couple of crazy uncles mixed in the mix just for fun. We see things throughout our career. We have experiences that are shared that I think only others within that culture truly understand. We can try and explain it to our families and we can try and explain it to friends, but they don't quite grasp the magnitude of some of this stuff. And going back to, it could be one large incident in your first week on the job that becomes that moment. It could be small events throughout your career. I've seen a lot of things throughout my 30-year career that I would never want anybody else to see. Mm-hmm. That you don't want to share with people outside. You have that bond within those who you work with, and they understand it because they've experienced it. But to try and articulate it and trying to explain it, but at the same time, you don't want to put them in that environment to make them live through some of those experiences. So you filter out some of the worst stuff, but you also process it, right? And so we use a variety of different ways. It might be working out. It might be using humor. And so people do things outside the job. I think for me, when I was on the SWAT team, we had only one incident where we've had to use lethal force. And following that, we had a debriefing. The group was so large because it extended into investigators and dispatchers, and everybody correlated to the incident. It was so large that the mental health professional that was trying to run the debriefing said, it's too big to do a formal process that we normally, what did you do? What was your role? What did you see? She says, I'm going to go around the room and I'm going to ask everybody one question. What do you do outside the job to get your mind off the job? Is it working out? Is it going for a bike ride or going for a run? Is it, pickleball? Is it, whatever your hobbies are? She goes, but everybody has to have something. You have to have something that takes your mind, that you can disconnect from the job outside of here, because there is she said, and this is what really stuck with me. She says, most of my clients outside of these debriefings on the personal side, she was a mental health professional. She says, most of my clients are people that were in this field for 30 years that held it in and never let it out because there was this stigma that you didn't want to share this stuff and you just held it in. She goes, I'm seeing those people now after 30 years of holding it in. She goes, and it's not healthy. You have to have some way along the way to address these issues, or there is a cumulative effect that's going to come back at some point. At some point, it's going to come out. Yeah. And you need to find a healthy way to bring it out along the way so it doesn't build up over time.
And some of my clients I see, same thing, where it's they're coming to me for an issue, whatever it is. Might be panic attacks, might be some other stress and anxiety issues or depression, and they always say, I don't know why. But then as we kind of go back further and further, and especially the folks who've worked in this line of work, it's accumulation of things that they've seen that they couldn't deal with because of where they were, whether military, police, or whatever. This mentality of suck it up and move on, don't think about it, we don't have time to talk about that kind of thing. It shows weakness and all these things that kind of like the old, I guess you'd call it the older school, or the stigma around mental health that used to be there that's kind of dissolving a bit, which is good. But yeah, I mean, I definitely see that quite a bit. Yeah.
I've definitely seen an evolution throughout my career, more in the last several years, that it's becoming more acceptable to talk about it. We have mental health resources, we have resources within the departments of peer support teams that you can reach out to, and they're now getting more proactive too. You have an incident maybe involving a child or a significant event like an active shooter, is they now set up these debriefings for you. Although it may not be mandatory, it's highly encouraged. And I think I try to encourage people to participate only because you may not feel that you need it, but your presence may help someone else that does need the help. 100%. And I think we sometimes don't process it ourselves the same way as others do, but realizing your participation and knowing someone else is not alone, I think is a huge positive impact. And I think the fact that we are willing to talk about it now, that we have flyers all over the stations now that let people know there's a phone call away for these resources. And it's completely anonymous. You don't have to share it with whoever you don't want to. Yeah. And I also think we process things at the fire station level that may be unique, and sometimes we use humor to deal with stress, and sometimes it's hard for people that are not in this environment to understand that it's not to be disrespectful, but it's a processing method that we use to get through it. And that needs to happen if you're going to move on through it. Because like I said, it could be a single event any time in your career. It could be right out of the gate. My first call I ever went on as a ride-along EMT was a cardiac arrest. Did CPR for 20 minutes and it just didn't work out. And I think the way I saw the paramedic kind of process it was very casual. It's like, okay, I guess this happens. And you right out of the gate realize, okay, this is part of my career. Is this going to bother me? Is this going to be a long career? Or I have to understand that. I think for me, dealing with cardiac arrest was I've been that person that's held the hand of someone taking their last breath many times. And that will add up over time, especially when you can't process this like, well, it's maybe someone who's lived a full life and they've had medical problems and there's only so much you can do. I saw a comment or a quote one time that really helped me process this, was, when God puts his hands on a patient, it's time to take ours off. There's a time for everyone. We don't always know when that is, but we're going to do everything we can to give them a chance and do cardiac care and CPR and do everything we can to help them, but there may be times when it's just beyond our capabilities. And we have to accept that. And that's helped me process a lot of that, what we see in moving on from that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just watching an interview of a person who has his own show on YouTube, and Sean Ryan. He's former Navy SEAL, CIA contractor, and he interviewed, did a 5-hour interview with a former Delta operator, and his first active mission was Mogadishu. And talking about, you know, how, like, there are parallels from what we do to what the military does. I'm not saying that we are military, it's totally different. We're not taking fire most of the time unless you're in a SWAT thing, but he made a really good point, and that was, we do a really good job of training people to go to the incident, to operate at an incident. But when was the last time you, or early in your career, I can't recall ever really how to come back properly. And I think that was a really good point, and it's true. And I agree with what you're saying. I began as an explorer 30 years ago, and back then my supervisors, probably similar to you, were a lot of Vietnam veterans. That was a very different mindset, and it wasn't because they were callous or cold people. It was, okay, you got to leave that call behind. We got to go to the next one, you know. And that's just the way it was, because that was the mentality. And I think that now, because of war, we not only see innovations in emergency medicine, trauma medicine because of war, but I think that how Vietnam was handled, how the first Gulf War was handled, and now how Iraq and Afghanistan were handled, people coming home, it's like, no, we really do have some serious mental health things going on because of the residual effects that happen, and the people that we're losing in the fire service, veterans and things that we're losing because it wasn't handled right, it wasn't identified quick enough. And I just want to at least interject that, because I thought that was a really good point that he made. We do a great job of training to go, do the job, but really it's kind of up to the station captain or to an informal leader to look out for the folks after that.
Yeah.
And thankfully that's changing.
Yeah, I fall back on before I even came into the fire service, I was part of the Santa Barbara County-wide critical incident stress debriefing team, and went through the initial training, Jeffrey Mitchell's model, which is still the foundation for mental health. And there was a quote or a comment that we always followed. It was, you're a normal person having normal reactions to an abnormal situation. And you try as a peer debriefer to emphasize that, like, these are emotions that are normal. There's nothing wrong per se with you, meaning that this is reactions that you're going to go through and process, and however each person does that. But back then you did bottle it up, you compartmentalized it, you buried it down deep, and you didn't really address it. But it's never going to go away. At some point, it's going to come out. 20 years ago, 2003, I had an incident where I was working as an engineer. I was moved up to captain for the day and responded to a brush fire. And at that brush fire was our response area. Another engine had responded initially and took command. It was a down power line. We knew that going in because the report was power outage in the area, which, as every firefighter knows, you see a column of smoke, power out of the area, and most likely there's going to be power lines down. So that's in case what it was. The first engine company had identified where they were next to the house. They took up structure protection. So then it was transition command to me. Well, I wasn't comfortable with that. And I look at it back now and I call it the error chain. It's a series of decisions or events that when they connect, they ultimately, if you don't address that error chain and break one of those links, if someone doesn't say something or do something that stops that process, the inevitable is predictable. Yeah. And in my case, the inevitable was we didn't recognize, I never even thought, for one, I never invested time in thinking about being a company officer running incidents. So I didn't speak up and say that I wasn't comfortable moving into that position. We arrive on scene, command is transitioned to me, the battalion chief happens to be about an hour away from coming from another station. So I have helicopters, crews, I have dozers, I have other engines all responding. I got to get my head wrapped around this thing, and I'm not prepared. Mentally, I wasn't ready for that. But this fire's moving up about a half acre, up a slope against the wind, so things are in our favor, but I got a helicopter, it's landing, it's going to go get some water. I got to start giving some assignments here. So we have to go see where this fire is over the hill. We go through a corral, cut a wire fence on the other side, and I got to get through this little black strip about 10 foot wide to get to this trail that goes up over the hill we can drive up. So my fireman who'd been moved to engineer and the firefighter, who was a rookie 1 year on the job, comes from another station. We're to that crew for the day. And we end up going to cross this little path. Well, there's a wellhead and 2 old dead trees. We're not going to get through here. Something's got to move. The wellhead's not going to move. I look at the 2 old dead logs, and I go, well, I can pick up this one. I go to pick it up, and what we never realized, never even thought of, was that there was another power line down. We had power lines down, pole to pole intact, and another set of line was down. Never saw it. Black, burned out grass, hazy from the smoke. Didn't see it. I pick up this log, I take 1 step, and I stepped on a down power line. I remember the jolt at that point, because I remember letting go of the log, hearing the thud of it hit the ground, and then landing, falling backwards, because the energy as it comes through your body, through my foot, it paralyzes every muscle in your body. Every muscle goes to maximum contraction. I fall back and land on the wire of all the directions I could have fallen, and I took a jolt, what they later calculated was 7,400 volts of electricity. I was on it for about 30 seconds. My fireman had seen me fall down. His name is John Beal. John he walks up to me trying to reach out to me. He crosses what's called step potential, where there's concentric rings. If you drop a stone in a pond, you see those little ripple rings. Each one of those rings is like another level of energy. And as you cross over 2 of those, you become part of the conduit. When John reached out to me, he was about 2 feet away, but the current entered my back, down my arm, out my hand, arced 2 feet, and knocked him down. And John was a triathlete, big guy. Had enough energy coming out of me to knock him down. He got up, comes back, second time, tries the same thing, gets knocked down again. I can see the whole thing out of the corner of my eye. I'm conscious the entire time, but every muscle is contracted. So my arms are locked at 90 degrees. My legs are coming off the ground. My head's turned to the side. So I see him coming in. He comes in for a 3rd time. Unbeknownst to us, there was 2 firefighters that came off the helicopter from the Forest Service that were actually in Vandenberg that were actually coming to work with us that day because their ship was out of service. So they're walking across with a wood-handled bundle of tools. John sees this, grabs one of the wood-handled shovels, says, grab the shovel, grab the shovel. He's trying to lay it in my arm. I can't move, I'm paralyzed. John lays it in the crook of my arm and uses it like a gaff and eventually pulls me off as Charlie, one of the firefighters from Vandenberg, grabs another shovel. He's shoving the wire away from me. This all takes place in about 30 seconds. The hard part to talk about is the thought process that goes through your head in those 30 seconds. The interesting thing is when it first happened, when I first fell and landed on it and took the jolt ended my back about 2 inches from the apex of my heart. How it never tapped my heart and just ended it. There's a moment there where you actually wish that happens because the pain is so excruciating from the electrocution, every muscle being contracted. Yeah. There's a moment initially you go, wow, that was fast. I guess this is how I'm going to die. And you accept it. There's a moment where you're like, this is it. This is how it's going to happen. For me, the switch was, your immediate thought goes, for me, it was my family. My son was 2. My daughter was about to turn 4. My wife and I have been married just over 5 years, and I realized I will never see them again. That became my why. That became the motivation for me to fight. So immediately you go from accepting it, and this is how I'm going to die, to I'm going to fight to stay alive. Now, I had no way to survive on my own. Had I not been where John would see me, there's no way I would have survived. Eventually the current would have tapped the heart. You fight because you know there also is someone there trying to help you. And that was John. My engineer, Bruce, had relayed that through dispatch. The helicopter heard the transmission. They came back and landed, and they disconnected the bucket, prepared for a medevac. During this time, the engine that was in the area from our department had cleared a vehicle accident. They had arrived on scene, and they were walking up just about the time that John brought me off. But the mindset is you're fighting. You know John, he's trying to help you. He's making multiple attempts. Had he given up at any time, I wouldn't be here. I'm only here because he tried 4 times. He never gave up. But that image of never seeing your family again, that was the motivator for me to hold on as long as I could. And that 4th attempt that John had made, once he pulled me off the wire, there's a moment where you're like, I'm going to survive. I've made it. And that was that moment, like, I'm grabbing the radio, like, well, what do I say? And I just put the radio down and let the crews do their job taking care of me. I wasn't the greatest patient because I'm a paramedic. I'm saying, we'll start the IV here. I'm turning the monitor so I can see it.
You were still doing all that?
All that. Yeah.
I'm amazed that you remain conscious through all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seeing John coming in and out was what, again, you hold on as long as you could, but it was controlling me. Every muscle's contracted, you're paralyzed, you're not in control, but you're fighting as long as you can. I said 4 words to John on his second attempt when he came back the second time, that I apologized to him later. Not that he wasn't enough stress and challenged enough to try and get a guy my size off this wire, but I told him, don't let me die. And he just kept trying. And he felt the electricity that I felt. It knocked him down twice. And he came back a third time, and the fourth time was when he just laid that shovel in the crook of my arm, using it like a gaff and pulling me off. And I sat there a moment on the road that was leading to where we needed to go, and just kind of took inventory of like, okay, everything's still here. And then they started cutting the clothes off, and I could see the legs, and I could see the skin sloughing off the legs from the exits, because my legs had touched the ground, completing the circuit. There's a point where they cut the shirt off, and I could see the skin sloughing off the elbow, because the elbow had hit the ground a couple times. And then they're staring at the back, and nobody's saying anything. I'm like, that's the bad one. From there, they flew me to a local hospital. I remember getting on the helicopter, and they had given me some morphine. And I remember the air from the window. I could feel the stinging of other burns, and the medic, Eric, showing me the vial. I go, yeah, a little more, please. And we were at the hospital there for a few hours doing the initial assessment, because burns are cosmetic. It's the internal organ damage that they're concerned about.
Yeah.
Once they stabilized me, they made a plan to move me down to the Sherman Oaks Burn Center, the Grossman Burn Center. They flew me down there. The irony of that whole event was I had been volunteering, helping an organization called the Firefighters Quest for Burn Survivors, in doing the Santa Barbara County chapter of this day-long event to raise money for burn centers and burn survivors. And when I landed on the helicopter on the helipad at the top of the hospital, half the team that met me there were people that I'd worked with on this volunteer. I had been a counselor for several years at a burn camp in Fresno, so I knew what these burn injuries and how these things can occur. And then now I'm a survivor at this point, and I'm working with the same people that have helped me with this fundraiser every year. So it just kind of came full circle. I was there 11 days, went through initially the debridement, which is basically getting off all the bad tissue. They got to get that off. And then the surgeries, which is now they're going to graft other good skin to patch up what has been burned. And then I went back several months later for another surgery to reduce some of the scarring, which you wear those every day. And then I wore a pressure garment. Pressure garments are, I call them, it's a wetsuit that's one size too small, and it basically holds the scars in check. When the skin normally does its job, holds everything all internally, while when the skin's healing from a graft, it takes about 18 months for that to be fully healed. And during that time, that's what these pressure garments do. They're very tight. So I came back on the job 2 months later and wore these garments for the next 18 months. You wear them 23 hours a day. But that's kind of helped the healing process occur.
So you went through this horrific accident.
Yeah.
And you're physically healing.
Sure.
And at some point, like you said, you accepted that this might be it. How do you mentally come back from that?
One of the most interesting things, and this was just a side benefit that I didn't really process till much later. When I was in the burn unit, I had so many visitors coming to visit me from guys from the LA City's FEMA task force coming to visit me. I had the search dog. I had stacks of letters in my mailbox when I got home. I had friends and coworkers coming to visit me at the hospital. It'd be like one group after another. I remember at one point thinking I just need a break to go to the bathroom. But all those people that came to visit was an opportunity to tell the story one more time, because I think that in itself is a healing process. It's healthy to get the story out. Again, it didn't allow me to sit there and just sit alone and process it. I got to tell the story over and over and over. And that, I think, helped me a lot with that whole transition back, as I got the story out. Giving John all the credit. He even came to visit me the next night and in the ICU. He says, man, I'm sorry I didn't work faster. I'm like, John, I don't know if I would have had the guts to do what you did. I don't know if I would have come back 4 times. We had a lot of laughs about it, and he was well deserving of our department's Medal of Valor. He received a Medal of Valor from the governor in the state of California. John was never the one to look for the limelight. I had to go receive his award for him on his behalf from the Governor Schwarzenegger at the time. But John's a very humble person, and he never really brings it up, never talks about it, because it's not what he wants to take credit for. But he does get the credit for the reason I'm here. And so I look at life now as I was given a second chance. I am in the overtime of life. So everything that I've done since then, I look at, well, you can choose to just kind of retract from life and hold things back and just try to get through the day. But my personality was like, I'm going all in. I'm going to get more involved in everything I do, because I don't know when that next chance is. I don't know when my time will be. I try to process it. Why me? Why didn't I die? Why didn't this thing just tap my heart and end at that time? And I've come to realize that we all have a purpose. We all have a reason to be here. We may not understand it. And to this day, I don't know if I still have that full answer. But I did have an opportunity to give a presentation to a service group, a Lions Club, about a year later. A friend of mine was a member. He asked me to come share the story, presented to a group at lunch. And unbeknownst to me, there was a Catholic priest sitting in the front row, another guest of another member. And as I'm sharing the story, I said, I'm a Christian, and I have my beliefs, and I think there's reasons that we're all here. I'm still trying to find out the why. I don't really quite understand. And he raised his hand. He goes, instead of asking yourself why you, did you ever think about asking yourself why not you? He goes, here you are. You were this counselor for burn survivors for kids, 5 to 7 years old for many years. You've helped run this organization, this fundraiser to raise funds for burn survivors and burn centers for over a decade. He says, you're a firefighter. He goes, why? You have a message. Mm-hmm. Why not you? And I think that caught me off guard, but it also kind of helped frame what this incident really was. It's like, I have a message.
I reached out to you, and you replied pretty quick, and you said, absolutely. And I was so happy. I really was. I was so excited because of your story.
At that point.
Yeah.